Snow hammered the Blue Ridge Mountains in a pattern that felt too familiar, too practiced, like a ghost repeating its footsteps. Ethan Cole had memorized storms like this. They came without warning, swallowed the roads, and pressed on the windows until every memory he fought to bury clawed its way back to the surface. So he did the only thing that ever kept them quiet. He drove. The old Ford rumbled beneath him, shaking as if exhausted by the ritual. Ethan did not need a destination. He never did. He just needed movement. Stillness was the enemy now. Stillness was where Marcus's last breath lived, where Ethan's mistakes replayed themselves with military precision. Rex sat in the passenger seat, upright and alert. The German shepherd never seemed bothered by the cold or the darkness. His amber eyes watched the world outside the frosted glass, like he was waiting for someone specific. Ethan wasn't sure if that made things easier or harder. Another storm, another night, another loop, around the same mountain road that most locals avoided even on clear mornings. To Ethan, it felt like penance. To Rex, it felt like duty. They had both learned how to survive by staying ready for the next hit. Something flickered ahead. At first, Ethan thought it was the kind of trick the snow liked to play on him. A shadow, a blur, a memory. He blinked, leaned forward, and the blur sharpened into two human shapes on the shoulder of the road. Slow, unsteady, wrong. Rex let out a low rumble in his throat, not a warning, not fear, recognition, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for these people, for this exact point in the night. Ethan eased off the gas. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs. Saving strangers had never scared him. What scared him was what saving them required him to reopen inside himself. When the headlights finally washed over the figures, he saw they were elderly. A man hunched over a walking stick that kept plunging into the snow. A woman leaning on his arm, clutching something to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Not bundled tourists, not hikers. People who had no business being out here in a storm that could kill anyone within the hour. Ethan pulled the truck to a stop a few yards ahead. His fingers tightened on the wheel until it creaked. A familiar argument rose inside him. Leave it alone. Someone else will help them. It isn't your mission anymore. But no one else was on that mountain. No one else ever was. Before Ethan could make a decision, Rex stood. Not just stood. The dog planted his front paws on the dashboard, staring back at Ethan with a clarity that made Ethan's heart break a little. Like the dog was saying, "Do not run from this. Not tonight." Ethan lowered his head, exhaling a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "You think we should stop?" he muttered. Rex didn't blink. Outside, wind scraped along the metal of the truck, making it groan. Ethan pushed the door open. The cold hit like a shove. He stepped out, boots sinking deep. The old couple hadn't noticed him yet. They were too focused on the impossible distance still ahead of them. The man stumbled. The woman caught him with both hands, her own legs shaking. "Sir," Ethan called out. His voice cracked from disuse. "Mom?" They froze, slowly turned. Snow clung to their eyebrows, their lashes, their breath shaking in the air. The man tried to straighten himself. "We're fine," he said, but his voice was thin, stretched tight with exhaustion. "Just trying to get down the mountain." Ethan glanced behind them. There was nothing for miles, nothing but cold, darkness, and a drop-off that had taken lives before. "You won't make it," he said. "Not like this." The woman clutched her bag tighter. A quiet tremble ran through her shoulders. Her lips were pale. She looked as though she wanted to explain something, maybe apologize, but the words refused to form. Something tugged at Ethan's memory. Something about the way she stared at him, wide-eyed, hopeful, but bracing for disappointment. a look he had seen too many times on too many civilians overseas. He took a step forward. "Let me help you." The man shook his head. "We don't want to trouble anyone." "You're not," Ethan said. Trouble would have passed by without stopping. They stared at him for a long moment, long enough for Ethan to feel the familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came when he knew someone's life now hung on what he did next. He hated that feeling. He feared it, but he still stepped closer. Behind him, the truck door clicked open on its own. Rex jumped out, not slowly, not cautiously, with certainty. He trotted straight towards the couple, stopping only when he stood between Ethan and them. Snow gathered on his fur, but he didn't shake it off. He looked up at them with that steady canine gaze that once made soldiers trust that dawn would come. The woman's breath hitched. Her hand rose, trembling, as if she recognized him. Or needed him. Ethan couldn't explain it. The dog shouldn't have known these people. But Rex behaved like he had been waiting for them through every mile of every storm. A strange chill crept across Ethan's shoulders. He looked at Rex, then at the couple, then at the road behind them, swallowed by white. Something was wrong here. Something he didn't understand yet. Something the dog seemed to sense before any human could. The old man swayed. The old woman whispered, almost too soft to hear. "We thought no one was coming." Ethan's jaw locked. Rex stepped forward, placing himself against the woman's leg, steadying her. And just like that, the decision Ethan had been avoiding all night made itself. He moved toward them. The chapter ends as Rex, without waiting for a command, turns toward the truck, then back toward the couple, then toward Ethan, as if guiding them, as if this moment had always been waiting for them all, as if the storm hadn't brought danger to their path, but brought them to Ethan's. Ethan had seen cold before, but never the kind that clung to people the way it clung to the two strangers in front of him. When he stepped closer, his flashlight cut a pale arc through the blowing snow, settling on their faces. The man straightened first, even though the movement nearly cost him his balance. "Name's Walter," he said, forcing strength into a voice that had been thinned by the storm. "Walter Reed. This is my wife, Evelyn." Evelyn lifted her chin, her breath trembling as it touched the frozen air. She clutched the canvas bag against her chest like it held something fragile, something worth braving a mountain storm for. Her eyes were soft, confused, darting between Ethan, Rex, and the empty road behind them. She looked like she was trying to place where she was, or maybe trying to remember where she had been before the cold stole those pieces away. Ethan recognized the signs. His own mother had slipped in and out like that during her final year. It wasn't something you cured, it was something you stayed present for. And presence was the one thing Ethan no longer trusted himself to offer anyone. "You folks shouldn't be out here," he said, trying to keep his voice level, impersonal. "Not in this weather." Walter gave a stubborn little shake of his head. "Didn't exactly choose the timing," he said, a ghost of humor behind the words. "Roads froze faster than we expected." Ethan could see his hands trembling uncontrollably, the gloves soaked through. The cold had already taken too much from him. But the old man kept trying to stand upright, as if the storm would take his pride next if he didn't fight back. Evelyn's gaze drifted past Ethan to the truck behind him, to the faint, warm glow inside. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper, a single thread holding together what little hope she had left. "We thought, no, one was coming." The sentence hung in the air. Heavy, honest, far too close to the part of Ethan he'd spent years trying to bury. He swallowed hard. For a moment, Ethan felt the old tug inside him, the instinct to step forward, to take control, to save someone simply because no one else would. Then the other instinct hit. The fear. He could save strangers. He always had. But saving people meant taking responsibility for what happened next. And the last time he had taken responsibility for someone, he had buried a teammate and watched a marriage collapse in the aftermath. Not again. He stepped back. "I can radio for help from the valley," he said carefully. "Someone closer can pick you up." Walter nodded slowly, as if expecting that answer. Evelyn's face fell, the kind of disappointment that didn't accuse, but still pierced. Rex moved first. The dog stepped in front of Ethan, blocking his path back to the truck. Not aggressively, just firmly, like a wall made of fur and loyalty and memory. Ethan tried to sidestep him. Rex moved again. "Not tonight," the dog's stance seemed to say. "You know that." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Rex, move." The dog didn't move. Walter let out a small, weary laugh. "Looks like he's already voted." Ethan wanted to deny it, to shrug it off, to pretend this was a choice he could still walk away from. But when he looked at Evelyn again, her shoulders shaking, her lips blue, her eyes shining with the desperate relief of simply not being alone, something inside him shifted in a way he didn't understand yet. He couldn't leave them. He hated that truth, but it was still the truth. "Get in the truck," he said finally, voice low, resigned. "We'll figure the rest out once you're warm." Evelyn let out a small breath, part sob, part gratitude. Walter nodded once, then leaned heavily on Ethan's arm as they made their way through the snow. Ethan opened the back door and helped Evelyn inside first. Walter followed with effort. Their breaths fogged the air. Their clothes dripped melting ice onto the truck floor. Ethan shut the door and leaned against it for a moment, feeling the weight of a decision he never wanted to make again. Rex hopped in with practiced ease, settling between the seats like he'd been waiting for this outcome the whole night. Ethan circled to the driver's side, pulled himself in, and slammed the door against the rising wind. The storm was getting worse. Snow slapped against the windshield. Darkness pressed in from every angle. He didn't ask them where they were headed. He didn't ask why they were out there. He didn't ask what was in the canvas bag Evelyn refused to set down. Some questions didn't need answers yet. Some answers would come whether he was ready for them or not. He shifted the truck into gear. The tires groaned against the ice, and the world outside disappeared behind a curtain of white as they drove deeper into the storm. 4. Strangers bound together by a night that none of them had expected, and none of them would forget. The storm thickened as Ethan pushed the truck onward, the wipers smearing white noise across the windshield. In the back seat, Evelyn held Walter's hand with both of hers, whispering steadily, as if words alone could keep him anchored. Walter's breaths were growing shallow. Ethan heard every one of them. "Stay with me, sweetheart," Evelyn murmured. "We're almost somewhere warm." But Walter didn't answer. Ethan checked the rearview mirror. Walter's chin had dropped toward his chest, his eyelids fluttering. A cold stab of recognition shot through Ethan. He'd seen men fade like that before. Men who tried to pretend nothing was wrong until suddenly everything was. "Evelyn," Ethan said, steady but sharp. "Has he taken his heart medicine recently?" Her hands tightened. We ran out 2 nights ago. We were trying to make it into town before the storm." "Hit!" Ethan cursed under his breath. The road ahead was already half buried, the guardrail barely visible. No plow trucks, no tire tracks, just the raw, unforgiving shape of a mountain trying to close itself off from the world. If he kept going downhill, the turns would get sharper, the ice thicker. One bad slide, and the truck could disappear into the ravine. And even if they made it, the main highway had been shut down hours before the storm peaked. Ethan knew the odds. He had spent his life calculating risks in seconds. This one wasn't survivable. Then Walter slumped sideways. "Walter!" Evelyn's voice broke into a cry. Ethan jerked the truck to the shoulder, engine shaking against the cold. He twisted around, reaching over the seat. "Sir, hey! Walter, can you hear me?" Walter's skin was icy to the touch. His pulse flickered unevenly under Ethan's fingers. The air inside the truck thickened with panic. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears slipping into the wrinkles along her cheeks. Ethan thought fast. The nearest clinic was 20 miles downhill. The road was unusable now. Even if he could drive it, they'd never make it in time. Up the mountain, only 5 miles behind them, stood a cabin. His father's cabin. Unused, unwanted, untouched since the funeral. Ethan had sworn he wouldn't go back. Not because of the place itself, but because of everything it made him remember. The last fight with his father. The unanswered questions, the guilt, the silence. But the cabin had one thing nothing else on that mountain had. Heat, shelter, supplies, and enough space for an old man to survive the night. Ethan clenched the steering wheel. He didn't want this choice, not the responsibility, not the memory. But sometimes decisions made themselves long before a man realized he was stepping into them. "Ethan," Evelyn whispered, desperate. "Please." That broke something open in him. Not loudly, quietly. Like the moment before a dam gives way, he took one last look at Walter's fading breaths, then shifted the truck into reverse. "We're going back up the mountain," he said. "We'll ride it out at my father's cabin." Evelyn nodded, trembling with relief. Walter remained hunched against the seat, unaware that his life had just been bought another handful of hours. Ethan turned the wheel. The truck groaned as it faced the incline again. Snow clawed at the tires while the wind pushed back in angry gusts. The gas needle dipped closer to empty. Just one more problem pressing in on all sides. Rex suddenly stood on all fours, tail stiff, ears forward. Not tense, alert, purposeful. As if he'd known this turn was coming. As if he'd been waiting for Ethan to finally choose it. When Ethan stopped once more at the foot of the cabin trail, Rex didn't wait for a command. He nudged the door latch with his nose, jumping out the moment it cracked open. "Rex!" Ethan yelled over the wind. But the dog was already moving. Not wildly, not exploring. Running a clean line through the snow straight toward the cabin buried in the trees, guiding them. Ethan felt a strange prickle rise along his spine. Rex had never been here before. Not once. And yet his path was precise, like he was following an invisible trail someone had left behind. Maybe someone had. Maybe another life. Another winter. Another man Ethan used to be. By the time Ethan reached him, Rex was sitting at the top of the porch steps. Perfectly still, perfectly patient, facing the door. Waiting. Not trained to do that. Not taught to behave that way. Yet there he was, posture shaped by something older than command. Ethan climbed the steps slowly, watching the dog. Snow swirled around them, catching in Rex's fur, but the dog didn't seem to feel the cold. He was locked onto the door as if it held every answer they hadn't asked yet. "You've never been here," Ethan murmured. "So why do you act like you have?" Rex didn't look at him, didn't blink, just waited. Inside the truck, Evelyn called out softly, fear tightening her voice. "Is it safe? Can we go in?" Ethan exhaled. There was no turning back now. No more roads, no more choices, only the cabin, only the past. He reached for the doorknob. Rex pressed a paw into the wood behind him, as if urging him forward. Ethan opened the door. The hinges moaned like the cabin was waking from a long sleep. Wind swept in. Darkness shifted. And somewhere deep inside that darkness, Ethan felt the weight of something old and unfinished stirring awake. The cabin breathed in the cold with a long, uneasy groan as Ethan pushed the door fully open. Snow dust swirled past his boots, curling into the dark space like the mountain itself had followed them inside. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. He just listened. The wind pushed through the gaps in the walls, humming low between the boards. The rafters creaked in slow, aching rhythms, as if remembering storms far older than this one. Every sound felt deliberate, like the cabin was taking note of the strangers stepping into its ribs. Ethan flicked on his flashlight. Dust, old pine, a faint smell of oil and iron, and memory. It hit him in a quiet wave, not sharp, not sudden, like a photo developing in water. Shapes turning into objects, objects turning into moments, moments turning into a life he had tried to outrun. Behind him, Walter gasped softly, clutching the doorframe for balance. Evelyn steadied him with shaking hands. "You can lie down by the fire pit," Ethan said, voice rougher than he intended. "Give me a minute to get it going." He crossed the room, boots thudding on the warped floorboards. Each step stirred motes of dust that glittered faintly when his light touched them. The fireplace still held the black bones of logs burned years ago, cold and crumbling. Ethan crouched and brushed them aside. Beneath the ash, something metal glinted. A pocket watch, his father's. He froze, breath, caught somewhere between grief and surprise. He lifted it with 2 fingers. The silver case was cracked down the middle, the hands forever frozen at 6:17. Exactly where time had stopped the day Robert Cole last closed this cabin for the season. Ethan's thumb drifted over the engraving on the back. For time well spent. He swallowed hard and set the watch aside before the memories could drown him. "That yours?" Walter asked softly. "It was my father's," Ethan said. "I didn't expect it to still be here." Walter nodded, as if he already understood the weight of the object. Maybe he did. Men who had served tended to recognize the silent gravity that hung around other men's ghosts. Ethan reached for the fire-starting kit tucked in a small wooden box beside the hearth. Inside were old matches, a rusted lighter, and a folded scrap of paper, yellowed from years of mountain winters. The paper held only 6 words carved by knife tip. "If you find this place, you're not lost." Ethan closed his eyes. That was his father's handwriting, strong, angled, unshakable. A message meant for hikers who stumbled here half-frozen, for neighbors stuck in blizzards, for anyone who needed a reminder that rescue sometimes came from hands you'd never expect. But tonight the message felt like it was written for him. Wind pressed hard against the walls, rattling the windows in their frames. The storm moved like a living thing, wrapping the cabin in its claws, squeezing. But inside the hearth, sparks jumped alive as soon as the match touched the wood. The fire caught slowly at first, then brighter, then steady. The glow pushed back the shadows, revealing the small world Ethan had once known so well. Hooks along the wall still held his father's rescue gear, ropes neatly coiled, old climbing harness, a battered metal first aid tin, a worn lantern that had lit dozens of search parties. Evelyn watched the flames bloom, her face bathed in warm orange, softening the lines of fear etched deep by the storm. "You've lived here long?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. Not in a long time. He didn't explain further. The cabin was the closest thing he had to a childhood home, yet it had always belonged more to the mountain and the people who needed saving than to him. He fetched a wool blanket from a cedar trunk and draped it over Walter's shoulders. The old man sighed with relief, sinking closer to the heat. "You did good bringing us here," Walter murmured. Ethan didn't answer. He focused on adding another log to the fire, watching the flame bite at it. Outside, the wind screamed through the pines. Branches slapped the roof. Snow hurled itself against the windows, trying to bury whatever warmth was left inside. Nature beautiful enough to ache, brutal enough to break anyone who underestimated it. It mirrored Ethan in a way he wished it didn't. Evelyn looked around the cabin, taking in the dust-covered remnants of a life paused, mid-sentence. "This place feels like it remembers people," she whispered. Ethan's throat tightened. "It does. My father used to keep it stocked for anyone who got stuck out here. Folks knew they could make it through the night if they reached this cabin." "Your father sounds like a good man," Walter said. "He was," Ethan replied quietly. "Better than I ever figured out how to be." Silence settled. Not heavy, but thoughtful. The kind of silence that warms instead of chills. Rex wandered the room with quiet purpose, sniffing corners, pausing at the old rescue pack, nudging the box of letters tucked by the mantel. He moved like he recognized the space, like he had walked it before. But that was impossible. Ethan watched him, a strange unease stirring again, soft but persistent, like a memory he couldn't place. "Find something, boy?" he asked. Rex didn't bark. He just sat beside the pocket watch and looked at Ethan. Really looked at him, as if trying to tell him something. Ethan's chest tightened, an emotion he didn't want to name rising uninvited. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the fire whispered. Both voices tangled around the cabin like past and present, negotiating a fragile truce. Ethan leaned back on his heels, staring at the flames as they climbed higher. This place had been built for saving people. And somehow, even after all these years, it was still doing exactly that. He just wasn't sure yet whether he was one of them. The fire had settled into a slow, steady burn, filling the cabin with a warmth that seemed almost out of place against the storm raging outside. The wind battered the walls like a giant, insisting that no one deserved shelter tonight. But inside, Walter's breathing had evened out, softened by the crackle of the flames and the thick blanket around his shoulders. Evelyn sat beside him, smoothing his hair with a trembling hand. She kept glancing toward the window, as if the darkness outside might suddenly swallow the little haven they'd stumbled into. Ethan poured a mug of warm water and handed it to her. She accepted it with a polite nod, her fingers brushing his briefly. They were icy cold. "Thank you," she whispered. "We didn't expect kindness tonight." Ethan didn't respond. He busied himself with checking the fire, rearranging logs that didn't need rearranging, anything to avoid letting her gratitude take root. Gratitude came with expectations. Expectations led to responsibility, and responsibility had cost him more than he could ever repay. Walter coughed, a brittle sound that echoed in the rafters. When Ethan turned to look, the old man's eyes were open, watching him. "Don't look so grim, son," Walter said. "I'm not dying in your cabin tonight." Ethan tried to smirk, but it came out crooked, tired. "Let's not test that theory." Walter chuckled until it turned into another cough. Evelyn laid a hand on his chest, grounding him. "We shouldn't have been out there," she murmured. "But we just didn't know what else to do." Ethan eased himself onto the wooden stool across from them. "Why were you walking in a storm like this at all?" Walter shifted, looking almost embarrassed. "My heart medicine ran out. Pharmacies down in Millbrook close early when storms roll in. We thought we had enough for another day." Evelyn added softly. "The power went out around 7. Then the landline died. Our phones stopped working hours later." "That happens up here," Ethan said. "But walking 15 miles in a blizzard." Walter stiffened slightly, pride tightening his spine. "My generation learned to problem solve without waiting on anyone. You fall, you get back up. You fix it yourself. That's what we believed." Evelyn nodded. "We thought if we just kept moving, someone might see us. or we'd make it to town before the storm got too bad." Her voice cracked on the last word. She took a shaky breath, eyes glistening. "We kept waiting for help," she whispered, "but help stopped coming for people our age." The sentence cut through the room like a blade dipped in truth. Ethan felt it, in the air, in the silence that followed, in the guilt that settled in his chest like unwanted snow. He caught Evelyn's eyes. She wasn't saying it for pity. She wasn't accusing anyone. She was stating a reality that millions of elderly Americans lived with every winter. Long wait times, understaffed services, forgotten rural communities, and the quiet fear that when they truly needed someone, they would be alone. Rex moved first. The dog rose from his spot by the fire, padded over to Evelyn, and rested his head gently on her lap. Not nudging, not begging for attention, just being there, offering something simple and instinctual: protection, presence, a promise without words. Evelyn inhaled shakily, her fingers slipping into his fur. "You're a good boy," she whispered. "You knew we needed someone." Rex stayed completely still, his weight grounding her. Ethan looked away, swallowing hard. Something tightened behind his ribs, something he hadn't wanted to feel in a long time. Responsibility. "You shouldn't have had to wait for help," he said quietly. Walter met his gaze. "But we did, and we would have kept waiting until the storm took us. People say things are better now, but when you're old, folks stop looking your way as quick." It wasn't bitterness, just resignation. Evelyn squeezed her husband's hand. "We lost neighbors last year," she said. "Not to accidents, not to sickness, just to being alone during storms like this." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew isolation. He knew what it did to a person. He had chosen it for himself. But these two, they had not. Walter's head slumped back against the chair. "We weren't afraid of the cold," he said. "We were afraid no one would notice when it took us." Ethan felt the truth of that land somewhere deep in him, right beside the part that remembered holding Marcus's vest while his friend bled out under foreign stars. Right beside the part that told him stepping in again would only reopen wounds he'd never closed. He wasn't afraid of saving people, he was afraid of losing them. He stood abruptly, pacing near the hearth, the heat brushing against his skin while the cold inside him remained unmoved. "Look," he muttered. "I did what anyone would have done." Walter laughed, a weak, tired laugh that still carried a spark. "No," he said. "Most people drive past trouble and pray they never see it again. You stopped. That matters." Ethan wanted to argue, to dismiss it, to push distance between them before the night tricked him into caring more than he should. But he caught sight of Rex, head still in Evelyn's lap, tail slowly shifting across the floorboards. "You still know how to save people," the dog's posture seemed to say. "You just forgot you could." Ethan's chest ached with something painfully familiar. He sat back down slowly, running a hand through his hair. "You're safe now," he said, trying to steady his voice. "I'll make sure you stay that way." Evelyn looked at him with quiet gratitude. "We're here because you came," she said. "That's enough." But Ethan felt the shift inside him, a ripple he hadn't expected. He'd spent years trying to convince himself he had nothing left to give, that saving one more person would break him, that losing someone else would be the end of him. Yet here he was, alive, breathing, watching two strangers rely on him like they already believed he was capable of more than he believed himself to be. He wasn't afraid of the storm outside. He was afraid of the storm he'd been carrying for years. And tonight, whether he wanted it or not, someone had finally asked him to step out of it. The storm eased sometime after midnight. but the quiet it left behind was heavier than the wind had ever been. Ethan moved through the cabin with slow, careful steps, checking the shutters, adding wood to the fire, doing anything that kept his hands busy so his mind wouldn't turn inward too quickly. Walter had drifted into a light sleep. Evelyn curled beside him, her hand resting gently over his. Rex lay between them and the doorway, a silent sentinel. Ethan crossed to the old stove, reaching for a kettle to heat snowmelt. As he opened the iron door, a soft crumble fell at his feet. At first he thought it was just ash, remnants of winters long gone. But then he saw it. Paper, fragile, half-burned, curled at the edges like dead leaves. He frowned and knelt. Carefully he picked up the largest piece. The ink was faded but still visible, looping in the familiar handwriting he hadn't seen since boyhood. His mother's. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. He sifted gently through the ashes, lifting each fragment as if it were a bone from a long-lost ancestor. More letters. 5, 6, maybe more. Some burned too badly to read, but others still held words, lines, pieces of a truth preserved only because fire, somehow, had not finished the job. Rex rose and padded over, nudging Ethan's elbow with his nose. Ethan swallowed hard and sat back against the counter, spreading the letters carefully across his knees. The first line he could read hit him like a blow, softened by time, but still painful. I know the mountain needs you. I just wish the boys and I did not have to learn to need you less. Ethan's eyes closed. He had been so young when she died, too young to understand why she spent so many nights sitting on the porch, staring down the road, lantern glowing beside her like a promise she refused to break. Another letter, edges scorched. If you don't come home before the snow, I'll keep the light on the porch. It's silly, I know, but it helps me believe the storm won't take you from us. And a third, I'm proud of the people you save. I just miss the man you are when you stop long enough to look at your family. Ethan bowed his head, the weight of her loneliness settling in his chest like stones sinking into deep water. A soft sound broke the silence. Evelyn. She sat up slowly, her shawl slipping down her shoulders. What? What do you have there, dear? Ethan didn't trust his voice, so he simply held out the nearest letter. Evelyn adjusted her glasses, then accepted it with both hands, hands that had long learned how to hold fragile things. She cleared her throat, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her steadiness. She wrote this to your father? She asked gently. Yes, Ethan said. Looks like he never burned them all the way. Or maybe he tried and couldn't finish. Evelyn nodded softly and began to read the letter aloud. I hear the coyotes at night and pretend they're the sea calling you back to me. The house feels too big without your boots by. The door. Her voice cracked. She loved him. Evelyn whispered. Even when she was hurting, she loved him. Ethan closed his eyes. He could picture it now. His mother sitting at the old kitchen table, pen trembling, tears drying before they reached her cheeks, refusing to let heartbreak turn into bitterness. He had never understood that strength. Not until now. Walter stirred awake, blinking himself back into the room. He saw Ethan sitting on the floor surrounded by charred letters and frowned. What's all this? Ethan couldn't answer. Walter shifted forward, squinting at the handwriting. Your mother's? He asked gently. Ethan nodded. Walter reached out and placed a warm, steady hand on Ethan's shoulder. The gesture was small, but its weight was immense, like someone giving him permission he never knew he needed. Son, Walter said softly, your father didn't fail her, not in the way you think. Ethan looked up, eyes shining in the firelight. Walter continued, voice low and rough with sincerity. Some men are born with a compass that points outward, toward whoever needs help the most. It doesn't mean they don't love the ones at home. It just means they never learned how to save both the world and their family at the same time. He squeezed Ethan's shoulder gently. That's not failure. That's a burden the good ones carry. Ethan stared at the letters again. Pages filled with longing, exhaustion, devotion. A woman asking only for presents, yet never demanding it. A man trying to give everything to everyone and losing pieces of himself along the way. Suddenly, the grief inside Ethan cracked, not with the violence of an old wound opening, but with the quiet release of something long frozen finally thawing. His breath hitched, his shoulders shook. He bowed his head and let the tears come. Not for sorrow, not for regret, but for the truth unfolding inside him. Saving people wasn't a curse. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't even the thing that had stolen his father from home. It was the legacy his father carried, and the one Ethan had been running from for years, terrified that accepting it meant losing everything else. But now, in the dim light of the cabin, surrounded by the words his mother never meant for the world to see, he understood. Legacy wasn't the weight. Silence was. Running was. Saving wasn't what broke him. Stopping was. Ethan wiped a tear with the heel of his palm, breath unsteady. Walter nodded at him with quiet affirmation. "You have your father's heart," he said, "and your mother's hope. That's a rare thing, son." Rex moved closer, pressing his head against Ethan's chest. The pressure was grounding, warm, alive. Ethan placed a hand over Rex's fur and exhaled slowly. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid of what came next. He felt it, quiet but unmistakable. A promise forming, a responsibility worth carrying, a truth that didn't hurt, but healed. Saving people wasn't the past he needed to bury. It was the future he still deserved to live. Morning arrived with a pale, forgiving sky, the kind that made the storm feel like something imagined rather than survived. The cabin rested in a hush that felt almost sacred. Ethan stepped onto the porch, taking in the cold air that no longer bit with malice, only memory. Rex trotted beside him, nose twitching toward the ridge. He caught something before Ethan did. A distant engine, slow, careful, crawling through the snow. A sheriff's SUV rounded the bend, tires crunching like breaking glass under the thin crust of ice. The vehicle stopped a few yards before the cabin. The door opened, and Sheriff Cole Maddox stepped out, bundled in a thick winter coat dusted with frost. He raised one gloved hand in greeting. "Morning, Cole," Ethan called, trying not to show the slight tension rising through him. Maddox climbed the stairs, boots pounding solid against the wood. His breath fogged as he spoke. "I figured I'd find you up here. Been looking since dawn." Ethan frowned slightly. "Is everything all right?" The sheriff nodded, slowly at first, then with more conviction. "Family down in Millbrook reported Walter and Evelyn Reed missing 3 days ago. We didn't know whether to expect a rescue or a recovery." His eyes softened as he added, "And then word came from the ranger station that someone saw tracks, a dog, a truck matching yours, so I followed the trail." Ethan braced for something. A reprimand, a lecture for not calling, a question about why he'd brought 2 fragile seniors into a cabin instead of down the mountain. But Maddox wasn't wearing the face of a man ready to scold. Instead, he took off his hat and sighed. "You did good." Ethan blinked. "I didn't even contact anyone." "You couldn't," Maddox replied. "Radio towers were knocked out. Phone lines, too. The whole county was flying blind." He gave a quiet, almost embarrassed chuckle. "The truth is, we're the ones who owe you an apology." Ethan stiffened. "For what?" For assuming no one would reach them, Maddox said. For assuming nobody was coming. A silence settled. A silence that wasn't awkward, but heavy with relief. Inside, Evelyn heard voices and shuffled towards the doorway. "Sheriff?" she asked gently, her eyes wide but warm. Maddox smiled at her. "Ma'am, your granddaughter's been beside herself. I'll get word to her right away." Walter followed, leaning on his cane. He managed a dry laugh. "Guess we gave everyone a scare." "You did," Maddox replied, "but you also gave this community a reminder." He looked at Ethan again. Help doesn't always arrive in a patrol car or a rescue truck. Sometimes it's a man who just doesn't keep driving. Ethan shifted, unsure how to absorb praise he hadn't expected. Maddox continued, stepping closer to the porch railing, where snow still clung like delicate lace. County's been talking for years about improving winter response. Storm after storm, same problems, isolated homes, blocked roads, and no backup routes. He pointed toward the ridge beyond the trees. "You know that old rescue trail your father carved years ago? We found the markers buried under the snow. Your dog led you right over it, didn't he?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, Rex found it." Maddox smiled. "Smart dog, and a good legacy. The council wants to reopen that trail officially, mark it, maintain it, use it as a winter emergency path." Walter brightened. "Robert Cole would have liked that. He deserved the credit." Maddox replied, "And so do you." The words landed softly. No applause, no speeches, just truth delivered with a sincerity that felt like a hand on the shoulder, steadying rather than pushing. Evelyn wiped a tear with the corner of her shawl. "People like us, we don't expect help anymore. Age makes you invisible. It means more than you know that he stopped." Maddox nodded in agreement. "Community thanks you, Cole. We all do." Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't used to gratitude. Hero talk made him uncomfortable. Praise made him feel like an imposter. But this quiet acknowledgement, free of fanfare, felt honest. Rex nudged his leg as if to remind him what mattered. Ethan finally spoke. "I didn't do anything special. I just—" Maddox cut him off gently. "That's the point. Good things don't need to be loud." No one was arrested for negligence. No one demanded explanations. No one blamed Ethan for not calling in a storm that silenced the whole mountain. Justice arrived quietly, in the form of gratitude, small repairs to a broken system, and the recognition that some legacies deserve to live on. Maddox stepped back toward his SUV. "I'll send a ranger team to help you get them home when the road clears. Until then, stay warm." He paused, hand on the car door. "And Cole?" "Yes. You should know. For a long time people around here wondered whether the coal cabin still meant anything. After this storm—" He gave a slow nod. "They'll think of it differently." The sheriff climbed in, engine coughing to life. As he drove off, Ethan stood on the porch with Walter, Evelyn, and Rex. The cabin behind them hummed with a warm fire. The mountain air felt sharper, but lighter. Justice hadn't come in sirens or punishment. It had come in a promise that the forgotten would be remembered, that the old would not be left behind, that help would come a little faster next time. Not loud, not dramatic, just right. Ethan exhaled, a long, steady breath. Something inside him eased, more than it had in years. 1 month later, winter finally loosened its grip on the Blue Ridge. The snow that once swallowed sound and hope had melted into thin, glassy streams running down the hillside. The wind no longer screamed. It just whispered through thawing pines. The world felt softer. Even the air carried a gentler weight, as though the mountain was exhaling for the first time in years. Ethan stood outside the cabin with a hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The porch was half sanded, half stained, smelling of fresh cedar and linseed oil. Volunteers from the nearby town had come and gone over the past weeks, fixing windows, reinforcing beams, repainting the roof. A carpenter named Tom Vargas replaced the cracked door. A retired teacher brought quilts. Someone left a new lantern with a note that simply read, "For the next storm. Winter mercy starts here." Ethan hadn't asked for help, but the town had shown up anyway. Quiet kindness, the kind that didn't ask for attention. Rex wandered between the volunteers' footprints still visible in the dirt, moving slower than before, a little stiffer in the joints. His black and tan coat carried more grey now, especially around the muzzle. Age had softened him, but not dimmed him. His eyes were still bright, sharp, alert. He watched Ethan with the same devotion he had the night they found Walter and Evelyn on the road. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Ethan's attention up the hill. A silver sedan approached, reflecting spring light. Ethan smiled before he even saw the faces. Walter Reed stepped out first, leaning on a cane but moving with more strength than he'd had during the storm. His cheeks were fuller, his eyes clearer. He took in the cabin with a long, approving look. "Well," he gruffed, "you turned this place from a storm shelter into something that actually looks alive." Evelyn followed, wearing a lilac blouse and a knitted scarf. Her smile was gentle, warm in a way that softened the cool air. "It looks beautiful," she said. "More than beautiful. It feels safe." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassed but grateful. "It's getting there." Rex trotted to Evelyn and pressed his head into her leg. She laughed softly, stroking his ears. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "You remember us." Walter chuckled. "That dog doesn't forget a soul." They joined Ethan at the trailhead sign newly erected beside the cabin. A wooden post, smooth and sturdy, carved by hand. On it read, "Winter Mercy Trail established 2025 in honor of Robert Cole, whose hands saved many, and Ethan Cole, who kept the legacy alive." Walter read it aloud under his breath. Evelyn held onto his arm, eyes glistening. Ethan looked away for a moment, pretending to check the stain on the porch railing. Compliments sat uneasily with him. Praise never felt deserved. But this sign, this one, felt right. Not because it carried his name, but because it carried his father's, because it acknowledged something that had been forgotten too long, that the mountain had always had a guardian, and now it had two. "You ready to open it?" Walter asked. Ethan nodded and lifted the rope. A small crowd had gathered, locals, volunteers, even the sheriff in his off-duty jacket with coffee in hand. They watched quietly, respectfully. Ethan didn't give a speech. He didn't like speeches. Instead, he said just one thing. "For those who get stuck, for those who think no one's coming, this path is for you." He cut the rope. The Winter Mercy Trail was open. People clapped softly, the way they do at a funeral or a baptism, moments that hold more weight than noise. Maddox clapped Ethan on the back. Tom Vargas handed him a thermos of hot cider. Evelyn wiped at a tear that escaped before she could catch it. Walter looked out toward the path winding into the trees. "Your father would be proud," he said. Ethan swallowed, unable to answer. He just nodded. Later, when the small crowd dispersed and afternoon sun washed the cabin in warm gold, Ethan sat beside Rex on the porch steps. The dog leaned against him, warm and steady. The ridge ahead was green again, alive, forgiving. Snowmelt shimmered along the trail like silver veins leading toward someplace hopeful. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't roar. It comes quietly, like spring breaking through stubborn frost. Ethan didn't say it out loud, but he felt it. Something in him had thawed, too. The invitation came on a folded sheet of paper, delivered by a school board volunteer who looked more nervous than anyone should be on a sunny spring morning. Ethan held it between two fingers, reading the handwriting twice before looking up at the woman. "It's not a speech," she clarified quickly. "Just a story hour. The kids are learning about community helpers. We thought maybe you'd be willing to come." Ethan almost said no. He wasn't built for stages or classrooms or rows of expecting eyes. But then he thought of Rex, of Walter and Evelyn, of the cabin lit by that small fire in the heart of a storm. He folded the paper and nodded. "All right, I'll come." Red Hollow Elementary was small, the kind of school held together by bake sales, volunteers, and a principal who fixed doorknobs herself when funding ran thin. The gym smelled faintly of crayons and old pine. A banner hung above the basketball hoop. Community Stories Week, every voice matters. Ethan stood near the back, hands tucked into the pockets of his flannel jacket. Rex lay at his feet, tail sweeping slowly across the polished floor, earning delighted whispers from the kids sitting cross-legged in front of them. Principal Harris introduced him briefly, not with flourish but with sincerity. "This is Mr. Ethan Cole. Some of you may know him. Some of you may know Rex. They helped our town this winter. Today he's here to share a story about kindness." Ethan felt heat creep up the back of his neck. Kindness was a big word for someone who had spent years convinced he had nothing left to give. He stepped forward anyway. The room quieted. Even the hum of the old heating system seemed to fade. "I'm not here to teach," he began. "I'm not much good at that. But I can tell you about a night when everything felt lost, and the people who helped me remember it wasn't." He told it simply. No heroics, no embellishments. He spoke of his father, Robert Cole, the man who built the cabin, the man strangers came home because of, the man who showed up when storms stole hope. He spoke of the old rescue route, forgotten until a German shepherd's instincts brought it back to light. He spoke of Walter and Evelyn walking through a storm because they believed no one was coming. And how wrong they were. Every few sentences Rex lifted his head, as if listening to the story he had helped write. The children didn't fidget, they didn't whisper, they didn't lose interest. They just watched him with big, quiet, absorbing eyes. Teachers stood at the back, some with softened expressions, one with a hand pressed subtly over her heart. When Ethan finished, there was no applause, just a hush, a stillness that felt like understanding settling over the room. A boy in the front row raised his hand, hesitant. "Mr. Cole, why'd you stop your truck?" Ethan exhaled slowly, caught off guard by the simplicity of the question. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because someone had once stopped for me. And maybe because sometimes the thing you're running from is the same thing you're meant to return to." The boy nodded like it made perfect sense. Principal Harris stepped forward. "Would you and Rex take a picture with the class?" Ethan hesitated, then smiled. "Sure." Children crowded in, hands gentle, eyes shining. Rex sat proudly, accepting pats like a seasoned ambassador. Later, as Ethan walked across the parking lot toward his truck, a teacher jogged after him, holding a thin, freshly printed newsletter. "Local stories section," she said with a warm grin. "Thought you might want a copy." On the second page, under the heading A, Town That Helps Its Own, was a photo of the new sign at Winter Mercy Trail. Beneath it, just one small line. Ethan Cole and his dog, Rex, reminded us that even in the hardest winter, someone always comes. Not bold, not centered, not surrounded by borders or stars. Just a line. Simple. True. Warm enough to melt something inside him he hadn't realized was still frozen. He folded the newsletter carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. Then he opened the truck door, Rex hopping in beside him, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the quiet stirring of something he thought he'd lost. Belonging. Evening settled over Blue Ridge the way a blanket settles over tired shoulders. Slow, gentle, final. The sun slipped behind the ridgeline in a wash of orange and fading gold, leaving streaks of lavender cloud stretched thin across the sky. The air held the first hint of night chill, but it was the kind of cold that made a man breathe deeper, not brace harder. Ethan stood on the cabin's front porch, one hand resting on the railing he had rebuilt plank by plank. Behind him, the windows glowed with warm light, casting soft amber squares across the ground. A thin wisp of smoke drifted from the chimney, curling upward until it disappeared into the dusk. At his feet, Rex lay with his head on his paws. Older now, calmer. But those eyes, they still carried that sharp, unbreakable alertness that had saved more than one life. He watched the horizon the way he used to watch the desert. Quiet, patient, ready. The trail below the cabin shimmered faintly, still damp with melted snow. A month ago it had been buried under ice. Tonight it looked like an open invitation. Ethan breathed in the cool air, felt it fill his chest in a way that didn't hurt anymore. They thought no one was coming. He murmured, the words barely louder than the breeze stirring the porch lantern. Rex lifted his head, as if listening. But someone always can. The truth of it settled in the quiet between them. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. A truth learned on a frozen night he hadn't meant to remember. A truth inherited from a father he was still learning to understand. A faint glow flickered on the road below. Ethan straightened. Not the sun. Not a reflection. Headlights. Distant, small, swaying slightly with the uneven mountain path. Someone driving slowly. Someone uncertain. Someone looking for something or someone. Rex stood, tail stiffening. The old instincts came alive in both of them at the same time. Ethan didn't sigh. He didn't question. He didn't wonder if someone else might step in. He simply stepped down from the porch, boots sinking lightly into the cool earth. The same way his father once had. The same way he had. Again and again. Because some roads don't stay empty forever. Because someone is always out there hoping help might still come. And someone, if they choose to, can always answer. He walked toward the trail as the headlights grew brighter, cutting through the dusk like a quiet call for mercy. Behind him, the porch light stayed on, just as his mother once kept it, just as someone had kept it for him. The camera of memory would fade here, the man, the dog, the path glowing under evening sky. But the feeling lingered like warm breath in winter. A reminder, a promise, a legacy. And for the people watching, the story didn't end. It simply handed them something to hold. Many people who watch stories like this say it reminds them of someone they once counted on. What about you? Share where you're watching from.